Worn out by continuous heavy fighting, the division in early July 1944 took up the defense along the Reutte River in Moldavia, 5 kilometers west of the city of Lviv. Here it received a replenishment of manpower and equipment. The replenishment consisted of people who had just been released from the occupation, not trained in military affairs. The command of the political department had the task to prepare the personnel for the upcoming battles, to educate them in the spirit of hatred of fascist invaders and love and devotion to our motherland, to teach them military skills through the experience of battles, to instill in them firmness and persistence in defense, determination and skill in the offensive. Trenches on the entire defense of the division were dug, continuous trenches full profile, equipped with machine gun platforms, artillery and mortar firing positions, dugouts for people. Along with the creation of the defensive line was intense combat and political training in companies, batteries, regiments. Division Commander Major General Karpukin and the division headquarters taught soldiers and officers tactics of offensive combat. That the training company of the division held 10-day training camps for sergeants, snipers. Division headquarters organized 5-day training camps of company commanders, batteries, platoons, political department of the division, party leaders, Comsorg agitators, and lectures on military historical topics and on the forms and methods of party political work in combat. The division's individual combat operations were analyzed. Training was skillfully combined with defensive combat operations. No one reckoned neither with fatigue nor with the burden of study. On a hot July day, soldiers of the Mortar Company of the 1,245th Rifle Regiment of Senior Lieutenant Babkin studied weapons. General Karpukin suddenly came to one of the calculations. Attention. Eyes to the right. Comrade General, the mortars are practicing rapid fire on the enemy, reported the commander of the regiment, Pyotr Demenikov. At ease, you, said the general and asked a question. The rapid fire is over, the enemy infantry destroyed, and then let's change the firing position. Why?
So that the fascists didn't have time to spot us and cover us with their fire.
That's right. The general gave the command. Change firing position. The squad quickly disconnected the tube and the mortar base plate, raised them on their shoulders, ran forward. Following the soldiers moved and the general. The calculation was approaching the height. The general ordered his adjutant to stop them. All drenched in sweat, uniforms darkened. General, wiping the sweat from his face, approached the soldiers who had already begun to install the mortar and smiled broadly. Well done. Well acted with knowledge of their work. Thank you for your service. You can be relied on. Continue your training. The general went to other units. There were meetings of party and Komsomol activists of the division, discussed the tasks of communists, Komsomol in the upcoming offensive. In the adopted resolutions, the communists, Komsomol assured the command that the tasks of preparing and conducting the offensive operation they will perform with honor. In regiments, battalions and companies held party and Komsomol meetings. They mobilized all participants to exemplary performance of military duty. All political work was subordinated to the main task, to inspire the soldiers to a decisive, courageous and skillful conduct of the fight against the enemy outside the homeland. You can live without food for 24 hours. You can live more than that, but sometimes, in a war you can't live a minute. You can't live without a joke. It's a joke of the most unwise. Ada Vardovsky. It was getting evening. The sky was cloudy. The soldiers returned to the dugouts. Today they were learning to repel a tank attack, to make counterattacks, to storm enemy positions. Heavy fatigue was overwhelming them, but no one thought of going to bed, just like yesterday and the day before. They had developed the habit of reading before going to bed. They surrounded the Komsomol agitator Voroboyov. Let's do something funny, said one of the fighters to Voroboyov. Is it worth it? The guys are tired, let them lie down. It's worth it, the soldiers shouted in one voice. Laughter is the best remedy for fatigue, added another soldier. Voroboyov did not make long to ask himself, took a humorous brochure and began to read aloud. He was interrupted by bursts of laughter. Suddenly Voroboyov stopped and offered to read his poems, which he had recently composed. It was a small poem called The Krauts in the Other World, after the general offensive. Come on, the soldiers cheered. Voroboyov diligently, clearly pronouncing each word, with appropriate intonations began to read. the Germans to God in the sky. They arrived in a crowd. God scratched the back of his head and said wistfully, "What the devil? Where did you come from? Where do you come from? It's like it is feeding you poison. Is he in his right mind? You arrogant maniac. He's giving me so much crap. And they're so skinny." For it said to him, "We were on our way to victory, and now we're in the light." God looked at them all and gasped, and his eyes went black. "Hey, brother, you're lying. I don't want to get in the way. We must drive them into hell." The Germans went to hell, whimpering and groaning. They look around. They say, "It's not bad here." They reported to Satan. The general laughter covered Vorobyov's voice. "Repeat, please, this place." A little restraining his laughter, wiping tears, asked Komsomol member Pakaluk, where Satan ran to. Vorobyov read. He ran to God quickly, that he might be pardoned. Meanwhile the fascists raped the witch, sneaking around, robbing what they've covered. They piled them up. All the traitors betrayed. They're drinking with Judas. "They robbed the devil himself," said Pavel Khmel, laughing. "And the witch got it," added Kazub. "And what do they do on our land?" Sighing, said Sergeant Nikolai Koshevoy. Vorobyov continued to read. The devil, looking at it, spat. "No, I will not tolerate here. It's the new order. Go away, I don't need such Orions." And on his way to heaven, he drove them away again. And God scratched the back of his head and said sternly, "There's no place for such scoundrels. There's no place for such scoundrels. And yet they're chasing these scum every day, thousands of them. No more of this evil tribe. No more hell. We've got to find them a place. It's a place worse than hell." "It's all right. They'll soon have such a place," answered Sergeant Koshevoy. A lively conversation began. Everyone tried to remember something, to tell something funny from what they had seen or from what they had read in satirical brochures. Machine Gunner Terman, read a passage of humor-cherished word of Thomas Smyslov. The sergeant saw the pain with which the abominable deeds of the enemy resonated in the soldier's heart. He was sure that if now to tell them forward on the enemy, they are ready, without sparing their lives, to throw themselves on the hated enemy, to express the unspoken thoughts, the feeling of anger of each of them. Koshevoy took a brochure off. They fought for the motherland. Loudly read the words of Lopakhin. "I, for example, have reached such a degree of anger that spit on saliva will hiss. We'll pull the legs of the children of bitches from where they grow, so that they won't walk on our land anymore." "So it will be, Comrade Sergeant," concluded Komsomolets Moknovsky. "The time is late, it's time to rest." Said the sergeant, closing the book. "Let's sing something for bedtime," said Komsomolets Kozub. Then Kuznetsov half-voiced sang a favorite song of the soldiers, which was taken up by everyone, who said that it is necessary to give up. Songs in the war? After the battle, the heart asks for music twice as much. Today we have a respite. Tomorrow we'll go back to fighting. So passed one of July evenings at the dugout, before the battles for Yasan, in the company of Senior Lieutenant Anatoly Nikolaevich Maletsky. At the front, a book and a song were as sharp a weapon and an indispensable item for a soldier as his bayonet and automatic rifle. The political department of the division did everything to provide all units with good literature and heartfelt songbooks. Sharp satire, folk humor, song, the constant companions of the soldier. They teach to hate the enemy, help to endure the hardships of trench life, marching life, and as a bell rise to the battle. That's why the soldiers, when given the opportunity, with inspiration read Ostrovsky's novel How Steel Became Tempered, chapters of Sholokov's novel They Fought for the Motherland, Tadovsky's poem Vasily Turkin, humorous brochures, Soldiers Laughing, many, many others. The head of the club, Senior Lieutenant Yegor Pantalaevich Shevchenko, understood well that a soldier is a great optimist, under no circumstances is not discouraged, and proudly looks at the future of his homeland, loves humor and satire songs. With this in mind, he built the work of the divisional club. On his instructions, the club's accordionist, Senior Sergeant Nikolai Yakovlevich Yelesiev, was often in the rifle companies. Before the war, he graduated from the Music Technical School, led a brass band in Kirovgrad. He died in fights on October 12, 1944, at reflection of counterattacks of the enemy. The fascists persistently resisted. Seeing a real threat of encirclement, Hitler writes in the area of ISI hastily deployed reserve forces. The troops of the Second Ukrainian Front reached the line of Radutsi, Ogriv, Dubasari, and were preparing for a decisive blow to the enemy. On the road to Yasan, where the main blow of the front was planned, under the cover of night there were continuous streams of vehicles with ammunition, tractors pulling powerful artillery, tanks, katyushas, and columns of infantry. This preparation for the operation was carried out so secretly that until August 18, the Nazis knew nothing about it. So, on the night of August 7, having surrendered its defense area, the Ural 375th Infantry Division marched in the direction of Yassy. All soldiers felt that something great was being prepared. It was preparing the ISI Kishinev operation. By the beginning of the ISI Kishinev operation, the division was in the second echelon of the 53rd Army, having the task after the breakthrough of the enemy's defense to develop the success of the troops of the first echelon. The artillery of the division, the 932nd Artillery Regiment, anti-tank and fighter division, artillery and mortars of rifle regiments under the leadership of the artillery commander of the division, Colonel Nikolai Danilovich. Azarov took firing positions directly in the fighting order of the infantry of the first echelon to participate in a fire attack on enemy positions during the breakthrough of his front line of defense. As soon as dawn broke on August 20, thousands of guns and mortars of the front unleashed their deadly fire on the enemy. Aviation dropped bombs and stormed the enemy troops. During the artillery preparation, up to 50 tons of ammunition fell on every 100 meters of the fascists' defense. This is how the newspapers wrote about it. On the eve of the offensive, the Military Council of the Second Ukrainian Front issued a directive, which was communicated to us, which would to explain to all the personnel of the troops that we are now fighting on foreign territory. Every soldier and officer is required high vigilance, tightness, and organization, a decisive fight against carelessness, ruthlessness, and promiscuity. The Romanian civilian population is to be treated with Soviet dignity and not to allow any arbitrary actions. We explained the international mission of the Soviet army to liberate Romania from the fascist yoke, spoke about the need to draw a clear line between the working people of the Romanian people and the fascist top brass, that the goal of the Soviet soldiers is not to take revenge, but to liberate the peoples of Europe by defeating fascism. Here broke through the enemy defense. Tanks, infantry rushed into the breakthrough, began to pursue the enemy. This was due to the fact that the front command managed to create a decisive superiority of forces and means over the enemy in the direction of the main blow. On August 21, to develop the success entered the breakthrough and the second echelon of the fronts. All armed formations, including our 375th Infantry Division. The division, breaking the fierce resistance of the enemy in its direction, began one by one to liberate the settlements of Romania and move forward. The events unfolded rapidly. The troops of the 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian fronts, the forces of the Black Sea Fleet of the Danube military flotilla, and long-range aviation in a short time defeated a large group of fascists, which led to a radical change in the military and political situation in the Balkans. Soviet armies by the end of August 23 surrounded and defeated 18 German divisions and 20 of 22 Romanian divisions. Hitlerites and fascist regime of Antonescu were deprived of armed support in the country. The victorious and rapid offensive of the Soviet army created favorable conditions for the beginning of the armed uprising in Romania. In the evening of August 23 in Bucharest, under the leadership of the Communist Party of Romania, there was an armed anti-fascist uprising which overthrew the fascist dictatorship of Antonescu. The new Romanian government declared its withdrawal from the war on the side of Germany and declared war on it. Not resigned to the loss of Romania, Hitler threw his troops on Bucharest, subjecting the city to barbaric bombing and shelling. The Soviet command did everything to quickly defeat the fascist units on the outskirts of Bucharest and to help the rebels. On August 24, the commander of the Second Ukrainian Front ordered General Manigarov to form and lead a mobile group of troops. The mobile group included the Army Heavy Tank Regiment and Major General Okimenko's 75th Rifle Corps from 2 rifle divisions, the Ural 375th and 233rd. In addition, the group included the 1st Volunteer Infantry Division named after Tudor Vladimirescu, formed on the territory of the Soviet Union from Romanian prisoners of war in February 1943, commanded by Colonel Nicholas Cambra. The mobile group received the order at dawn on August 26 to go on a decisive offensive from the line by Olau, Beresti, to break through the Focșani gates to seize Bucharest. On August 26, the 375th Ural Division, in accordance with the above order from the area Bylord, went on the offensive in the southern direction. Destroying scattered groups of Germans, moved forward at 50-60 kilometers per. On August 28, the division loaded on the vehicles of the 64th Motorrent in the area southeast of the town of Tecuci and began to pursue the enemy along the route Tecuci-Focșani-Urenceni to seize Bucharest. Pursuing the retreating enemy, the division, overcoming water obstacles, engineering barriers and suppressing some pockets of enemy resistance, approached the Focșani fortified area, where a strong defence was created. However, the pace of the offensive was so high that the Germans did not have time to occupy all the long-term fire points, which were up to 6 per kilometre of the front. The division broke into the Focșanski fortified area and overcame it and rushed towards Bucharest. The division had to act without artillery support, but showing determination, high skill, courage and bravery, the soldiers came out victorious in single combat with the enemy. So acted the company of Senior Lieutenant Maletsky. In a short battle in the Focșani fortified area, it destroyed 2 pillboxes, shot down 1 tank. The platoon of Junior Lieutenant Mikhail Lavrenkov, acting in the main camping outpost, seized the bridge across the river by a decisive attack and held it, repulsing furious German attacks until the main forces approached. Mikhail Lavrenkov was presented to the Order of Lenin, thus breaking the stubborn resistance of retreating enemy units, liberating Romanian towns and villages. The 375th Ural Division, together with the 18th Tank Corps, came to the outskirts of Bucharest. On August 31, 1944, the Ural Division entered Bucharest, the capital of Romania, liberated by the Romanian rebels, and marched solemnly through its streets. When the regiments of the division passed through the streets of the city with unfurled battle banners, the citizens, festively dressed, greeted their liberators in a friendly manner, waved red flags, raised a clenched fist as a sign of greeting, and shouted hurrah. They threw flowers at the passing units of the division. The cars could hardly move. Some young Romanians jumped on the bottom of the cars and tightly squeezed the hands of the soldiers. In the squares there were rallies, people danced, hugged and kissed our soldiers. Only by the evening the division units came to the western outskirts of the city and took the defence. In the evening of August 31, the soldiers of the division received the 9th Commendation of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief Comrade Stalin, and the Division for Excellent Actions on the outskirts of Bucharest received the name Bucharest, also became Bucharest 1000, 241st Rifle Regiment. The division was tasked with the defence of Bucharest and garrison duty, while performing garrison service in Bucharest from August 31 to September 10. The units of the division put the material part in order, prepared for the pursuit of the defeated on the outskirts of Bucharest, but stubbornly resisting an unkilled enemy. At the same time, the soldiers of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment guarded the interned fascist generals, officers, diplomats and employees who had previously worked in German institutions in Bucharest, and every night on 30-40 trucks they were sent to the Soviet Union. On September 1 in Bucharest, the division, born in the Urals, celebrated its glorious 3-year anniversary. Veterans of the division gathered for the evening. Each of them had thousands of fiery kilometers behind their shoulders, people who overcame the powerful defensive lines of the enemy, forcing large water obstacles under enemy fire, with unwavering steadfastness repelled fierce attacks of tanks, motorized infantry of the fascists near Moscow, and the Kursk Bulge in the Korsun-Shevchenko operation, and then defeated them. On the chest of each of them shone orders and medals received for their exploits, about each of them in a fairy tale to tell, yes, to describe in pen. Congratulatory letter to the soldiers and officers of the division commander and chief of the political department ended with these words: I congratulate you, battle comrades, with the 3rd anniversary of the division. I urge all personnel to apply even more military skill, To show examples of heroism and bravery in the present foreign campaign, hold high the honor and dignity of the victorious soldier. Be vigilant. Never forget that we are outside our homeland. Eternal memory and glory to the brave sons of the fatherland who gave their lives for the cause of victory. Long live our free Soviet motherland. Forward to defeat the enemy. March. On the night of September 10, having surrendered the defence and garrison service in Bucharest, the division set out on the march with the task of catching up with the units of the 53rd Army, which had already pursued the enemy beyond the Carpathians. We had to march in a forced march to fulfill the task set for the division.
The division commander went to the point through which the regiments were to pass to look at the soldiers marching forward, at their faces.
Standing on the side of the road in the rhythm of the march, he caught the rhythm of the upcoming battle, the readiness of the division. Approaching the soldiers, walking beside them, he addressed them and asked if their feet were not chafed, if their weapons were in order. Fatherly tone of address liked the soldiers. They felt in it love and care of the commander about them. But this love was hidden deep. The soldiers walked calmly, as if not in a hurry. So go people doing a job that they are familiar with. They went further and further westward. Passing by the commander, the officers, putting their hands to their pilots, reported on the move. The battalion follows the route, reports Captain Bukayev. Anti-tank division, reports Captain Skorobogatov. Regimental commanders jumped off their horses, came up to the commander with reports and stayed with him until the end of the passage of their units. The wagons rumbled, the kettles tinkled. Finally followed, rattling wheels, artillery regiment. The division commander overtook the regiment and drove into the village. The quartermasters were swarming around the house assigned to the general, and the signalmen were pulling wires, establishing communication with the units. The sky had cleared, the moon peeped out from behind the broken clouds. Going into the house, the commander asked with whom the connection was working. "No, connect me with Atamanov." For 2 days, the division passed 120 kilometers and concentrated in the city of Rashnuri-Deveda. I would like to note the good work on the march of the Komsomol Bureau of the 3rd Rifle Battalion of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment, Komsomol leader Junior Lieutenant Shmelev, as well as Komsomol members of this battalion. Shmelev twice held brief meetings of the Bureau, which heard reports on the work of Komsomol organizations of companies on the march. Much work was done by the Bureau and Komsomol members of companies to instruct reciters and conversationalists of platoons and departments. The best among the reciters were Komsomol members Makhnovsky, Pokolyuk, Kozub, Kureyanov. An example of endurance on the march showed the Komsomol leader of the sanitary plane Sergeant Nina Sherentsova. It was a modest, calm, serious girl, a beautiful soul person. During the march, she never once sat on the cart, went in column with the Red Army. Her presence here favorably influenced the soldiers. At the sight of her, soldiers' shoulders straightened, eyes became bright. When a soldier rubbed his leg, she quickly rendered medical aid. During the transition, machine gunner Melnikov began to complain that he was tired, cannot carry the machine gun. Nina took the machine gun and carried it. Seeing this, the soldiers began to laugh at Melnikov, began to tell him that the girl was going with them, that she was also tired, told him to take his machine gun, shamed him. Then Melnikov took back his machine gun and reached the place. When asked by the soldiers why Nina did not get on the platoon wagon, she answered, "And here it is good that I go with the men. After all, if I sit down, the soldiers will also ask to sit on the wagon." In the battalion for the march was awarded 6 people, 4 of them Komsomol members, including Nina Sherentsova. 7 Komsomol members were commended by the battalion commander. Fighting at the turn of Chenadolmaya, Periam, by the division, in Roshnari-Deveda loaded into echelons, continued to move by rail and, having made a 170-kilometer journey, on September 18 unloaded near the town of Timisoara, took the initial position for the offensive. On September 20, the 1241st and 1245th Rifle Regiments, supported by the 932nd Artillery Regiment of the division, after a fierce battle saddled the Vina-Timisoara highway and on September 21 occupied the town and the railway station of Vinga, where they killed many fascists and captured large trophies: 7 wagons, 42 platforms with weapons, 2 ammunition depots and 30 wagons with food. Continuing the offensive, breaking the stubborn resistance of the enemy, the division reached the line Chenado-Mare, Periam, Pisok, Chandra, Bild. The front of the offensive reached 60 kilometers, with the exit to the specified boundary. The division cut off the ways of the Germans' withdrawal to Hungary. Fierce fighting ensued. The enemy, having pulled a large number of tanks, self-propelled artillery and infantry, went into furious counterattacks, trying to make a direct way to Hungary. On September 23 near Timisoara, the enemy surrounded our 2nd Rifle Battalion of the 1,245th Rifle Regiment. Only 35 men escaped from the encirclement, including 17 wounded, including the battalion commander Captain Gorinovsky, who was carried out in his arms. According to fighters' stories, in the battle the platoon of Junior Lieutenant Mikhail Alexandrovich Sukachev especially distinguished itself. The platoon hit 3 tanks. One of them with a bunch of grenades was hit by Sukachev himself. The machine gunner, Lieutenant Ivan Timofeyevich Pasetkin, who crushed many fascists with his machine gun, acted perfectly. The dead were buried near the village Chandra of Timisoara district. During the next enemy counterattack on the positions of the 1st Battalion of the 1,243rd Rifle Regiment, dozens of tanks, with white crosses on their sides, rushed. Platoon of Junior Lieutenant Mikhail Grigorievich Lavrenkov entered the unequal battle and killed many Hitlerites. When the first anti-tank gun number 1 was out of action, the platoon commander took the gun and hit the tank with several shots. The second enemy tank tried to enter the flank of the platoon, but as soon as it made a turn, Lavrenkov hit it too. Several tanks were hit by artillerymen and soldiers of neighboring units. At this time, Lavrenkov was informed that the company commander was wounded. Then he, without wasting time, took command of the company and continued to lead the reflection of counterattacks. Counterattacks in this area were repulsed. For this battle, Lavrenkov was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. On September 26, the enemy concentrated in a narrow area up to 20 tanks and armoured personnel carriers, up to a regiment of infantry, and attacked the town of Periam, where the division headquarters was located, and defended the Engineer Battalion Anti-Aircraft Machine Gun Company Anti-Tank Division. There was a fierce battle that lasted about 6 hours. Heroically fought soldiers. The anti-tank division hit 3 tanks. A young soldier, Ivan Lutsenko, camouflaged himself well and waited for a convenient moment to hit for sure. The tank was coming straight at him, but the brave warrior did not chicken out, and as soon as the tank started to make a turn, he hit it with a skillful shot. The crew of the tank jumped out and tried to get away, but accurate fire of machine gunners, who were near Lutsenko, killed them. In this battle, David Vasilievich Moskalenko and Pyotr Dmitrievich Zatovsky showed heroism and shot down 1 tank each. The enemy continued to attack with superior forces. Despite heavy losses, he rushed forward and on September 27 pushed our units and occupied Periam. At the same time, the enemy pressed on the left flank of the division, made fierce counterattacks against the 1,243rd Infantry Regiment. The enemy sought to go to the flank of the division and connect with his grouping located in the eastern part of Hungary, but no matter how hard the enemy tried, he failed to realize his plans. At this time was received a message about awarding 1,243rd Rifle Regiment of the Order of the Red Banner and 1,245th Rifle Regiment of the Order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. The news about the awarding of the regiments quickly spread throughout the units. It inspired the soldiers to new feats, to perseverance. Machine gun crew of Senior Sergeant Ivan Sergeyevich Tanasichuk of the 1,243rd Rifle Regiment, reflecting the enemy counterattacks, was almost completely taken out of service. Only the commander of the crew, Tanasichuk, was left. Despite the wounding, he continued to repel the attacks of the advancing German machine gunners.
Nikolai Andreevich Koshevoy, a sergeant of the 8th Rifle Company of the same regiment, went into the rear of the enemy machine gun point in the area of Bild, destroyed its calculation and, having captured the enemy machine gun, opened fire on the Germans from it. This daring raid caused the enemy confusion, which was used by other fighters to strike from the front. When the platoon commander was wounded, Koshevoy took command of the platoon. The artillerymen of the 1st Battery of the 932nd Artillery Regiment showed examples of heroism. On September 27, Repulsing enemy counterattacks, they shot down 3 tanks, 4 armoured personnel carriers, destroyed 2 enemy guns. The Germans concentrated their fire on the gun of Evgeny Iosifovich Gurko. The calculation took cover in the crevices. At that time, an enemy tank appeared. The Commissar Volganov, despite the strong artillery fire, ran to his gun and fell down to the panorama. Seconds passed and the first shot sounded. The shell passed a little ahead of the tank. Volganov made a correction. In the sky, the enemy planes began to buzz. They howled and squealed down, dropped bombs.
Volganov did not see the planes and did not hear the bursts of bombs and shells. He was preoccupied with one thing: to stop the enemy tank. The German tank noticed the gun and opened fire. An enemy shell flew over the gun. Not far away exploded the second. Shards hit the shield of the gun. Volganov's third shot sounded. The shell exactly hit the side armor, and the tank burst into flames. Suddenly blood spurted, and drops of it froze on the metal of the gun. Volganov sat down a little and then fell. After the battle, the Partog of the division, Junior Lieutenant Kornifashich Nesnamov, came to the battery, congratulated the personnel with the victory, organized the issue of the leaflet Glory to the Heroes, which showed the heroes of the battery, where one of the best was Gunner Volgunov. On behalf of the battery, wrote to the parents of Volganov, Kozyrev, Sirkin, Gurko, and Mironov, in which they told about their heroic deeds and thanked them for raising hero sons. The division command presented Volganov to the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Particularly fierce fighting broke out for the village of Chenadol-Mer, where the 1241st Bucharest Rifle Regiment was defending. The situation was getting tenser by the hour. The enemy, having occupied Periem, Serafala, Sanikolol, Herman, cut the ways of ammunition supply to the regiment. From 3 sides, the regiment was pressed to the Maros River by superior enemy forces. The regiment's task was to hold the bridgehead on the right bank of the Maros River at all costs, and to prevent the enemy from connecting with his group in the southeastern part of Hungary. Major General Karpukin, the division commander, and I, the chief of the political department of the division, decided in this tense situation to be in the regiment to assist the regimental command in repelling the enemy attack. 5 days and nights of fierce fighting with the enemy. Regiment as if grown into the ground. Neither limited ammunition nor fierce attacks of the enemy could not push him from his position. The soldiers stood firm. Having repulsed the enemy attacks, on October 7 the division itself went on the offensive, and having broken the resistance of Hitlerites, then in persistent fights again occupied Periem, Serafala, Chandra, Bild. During the battles at this line, the soldiers of the division shot down and burned more than 30 tanks and armoured personnel carriers, killed a lot of enemy manpower. However, the division itself also suffered heavy losses of soldiers, officers and materiel. Many of our comrades in arms remained on the battlefield forever. Colonel Valam Mikhailovich Tuvadze, deputy commander of the division, Major Grigory Levich of Zeleznev, deputy chief of the division's political department, were killed. From these battles, the personnel of the division came out hardened, gained experience in fighting with enemy tanks, as most of the new recruits had not yet been in major battles. Many of them showed courage and bravery, and here, on the Romanian land, our soldiers fought as courageously and selflessly as at the walls of their native home. Not the sense of revenge led them into battle, but the desire to bring the end of the war sooner, to help the peoples of the Balkan countries to get rid of the fascist yoke. The fighting of the Soviet troops to liberate Romania lasted almost 7 months. They began by forcing the Prut River on March 27 and did on October 25, 1944, with mastering the last strongholds of the Nazis, the cities of Satu Mare and Kari. The enemy was rushing to the aid to the encircled grouping near the city of Debrecen. The division was assigned the task, together with other formations of the 53rd Army, to block the way of the enemy troops coming to the rescue to the encircled grouping. Fulfilling this task, the division from October 9 to 13 made a 170-kilometer march and reached the towns of Kishiwishalash and Mezitua. Having met large forces of infantry and tanks of the enemy, the division immediately entered the battle. On the night of October 17, it entered the rear of the enemy and cut the railroad and highways going from Debrecen to the west, fighting hard in difficult swampy terrain. On the night of October 18, The regiments occupied the station Gazdega west of the town of Balmazuvivor. For the Germans, it turned out to be a surprise. Even when the station was already occupied by our regiments, the Nazi transport continued to approach the station. In addition, we captured officers traveling in passenger cars, communicators going to restore the telephone line. Even the tank Tiger, which was coming to our aid, was captured alive. With the loss of Gazdagshagi station, the enemy lost the main artery of roads leading to the west of Debrecen. Therefore, the enemy tried to regain it at any cost. He launched large forces of infantry and tanks on a narrow section, but each time, suffering losses, was forced to roll back. Especially fierce fighting broke out on the outskirts of the town of Balmazuvivorosh, which was a strong stronghold of the German, covering his withdrawal from northern Transylvania to Hungary. Parts of the division, having repelled enemy counterattacks, on October 18 broke into the town of Balmazuvivorosh, but by enemy counterattacks on October 19 were knocked out of the town. On October 2021, the division attacked Balmazuvivorosh several times, but had no success. Only on October 22, in cooperation with units of the I Guards Airborne Division, the town of Balmazuvivorosh was completely taken. After that, they started to clear the left bank of the River Tisa in the direction of the town of Polgar, and on November 2, with persistent fighting, came to the eastern bank of the River Tisa in the area of Folias Polgar. The Germans put up a desperate resistance, and only the persistence and swiftness of the attack and the daring of the soldiers in accomplishing the task decided the success of the battle. I will cite only a few episodes that show the courage and bravery of the soldiers. On October 19, when the gun crew of the 45mm gun of Sergeant Alexander Vasilievich Ivakin of the 1241st Rifle Regiment was attacked by an enemy armoured personnel carrier at a high speed, while firing continuously. Ivakin let it close to him and hit it with the third shell. German machine gunners jumped out of the vehicle. The calculation opened fire on them with fragmentation shells and destroyed them. On October 24, the enemy counterattacked the 1245th Infantry Regiment with tanks and infantry. A battle ensued. On Panteley Sadovsky's trench there was a head tank of the enemy, followed by 7 tanks and 5 armoured personnel carriers. The sergeant, having taken cover in the trench, waited for a convenient moment, and as soon as the enemy tank came to 15-20 metres, threw an anti-tank grenade under the track. The wounded tank stood up, the crew jumped out of it and opened fire on Sadovsky. The brave sergeant was wounded, but continued to fight back with a rifle and grenades until his comrades came to his aid. It is easy to say, hit the tank, but it is necessary not only to keep composure and restraint, it is necessary to stand in a psychological duel, still hit the armoured mob. After Sadovsky hit the lead tank, the other tanks and armoured personnel carriers, slowing down, began to dismember. 1 tank and an armoured personnel carrier exploded on mines placed by the sappers. Confusion began to set in for the enemy, taking advantage of this. The artillerymen of the 1st Division of the Art Regiment opened fire. Gunner Shubin hit a medium tank. The next tank was hit by Gunner Kestrich. Tanks and armoured personnel carriers scattered from side to side and firing indiscriminately. In this battle, the enemy lost 5 tanks and 3 armoured personnel carriers. Thus, Sergeant Sadovsky, having hit the lead tank, forced the tanks and armoured personnel carriers following him to dismember. Thus, he decided the outcome of the battle by his heroic deed. The news of Sadovsky's heroic feat quickly spread to all units and subdivisions of the division. This feat was dedicated to a special leaflet issued by the political department. In the units issued leaflets, Glory to the Hero combat leaflets, held conversation with the description of his feat, sent a letter to his parents. He himself was awarded the order. A group of scouts of the 1241st Infantry Regiment led by Lieutenant Ivan Mikhailovich Grekolov was assigned the task to penetrate the enemy's defences before the beginning of the offensive, to detect machine gun points and take the town, not a private, but an officer. For 2 days the scouts studied the location of the Germans. It was almost impossible to get to their rear. The only place was a hollow, but it was periodically shot by machine guns, and at night it was illuminated by rockets. In short, to take the town was an impossible task. There was only hope for their own experience, ingenuity and the courage of their subordinates. The scouts thought of something. Late at night, they crawled along a swampy place and got closer to the Hitlerites' defense. Suddenly there was a commotion in the location of the Nazis. The thing is that literally before their eyes the machine gun, which from time to time shelled the gully, broke from its place and crawled in our direction. The mysterious behavior of the machine gun obviously stunned the enemy. The Germans raised indiscriminate firing, began to launch flares. All attention of Hitlerites was fixed to the escaped machine gun. It was not up to observation of the gully. Our scouts took advantage of it. They penetrated into the rear of the enemy. Having noticed a machine gun point, they crawled up to it and destroyed its calculation. Soon spoke the second machine gun of the enemy. The capture group bypassed it from the rear and killed the machine gunner with automatic fire, and captured the officer lying next to him. The captured officer turned out to be Lieutenant Paul Callas, commander of the 8th Company of the 66th Motorized Regiment. He gave valuable testimony. How did the machine gun escape? When the scouts, under the cover of darkness, moved into the gully and lay down, Scout Pyotr Sokolov, taking with him a skein of field telephone cable, crawled stealthily to the enemy firing point. Having chosen a convenient moment, he hooked the end of the telephone cable to the machine gun and, unwinding it, returned to his own. Before rushing to the enemy, one of the scouts began to pull the cable on himself, so the machine gun came to life, depriving the fascists of the opportunity to fire at the gully. The scouts, having captured 2 machine guns and a tongue, returned to the regiment without losses. The whole group was awarded. Covering the flank of the advancing company, the squad of Junior Sergeant Semyon Vasilievich Perkin was suddenly attacked by a group of the enemy. A battle ensued, during which 8 Hitlerites were killed and 4 managed to escape. The squad captured 7 automatic rifles and documents of the killed, but this battle cost the squad dearly. 2 were killed and 3 were seriously wounded. The 7th Rifle Company of the 1245th Rifle Regiment, advancing ahead of the other advancing units, was surrounded by enemy tanks and infantry. The commander of the company, Communist Junior Lieutenant Pavel Nikolaevich Kulev, skillfully organized the company's fight in the encirclement. The ring of encirclement more and more tightened. In several places the soldiers engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Kulev himself, directing the company's fight from time to time, was firing at the enemy infantry from a machine gun. Hitlerites came closer and closer to his command post, but did not fire on him. Obviously, they decided to take him alive. Kulev let them get closer and threw grenades. Enemy soldiers opened fire on Kulev and wounded him, but they were attacked by soldiers of the company and exterminated many. The Germans failed to pass through the boundary of the company Kuleva. Parts of the division from October 15 to 25, repelling enemy counterattacks, went forward and during this time hit and burned 9 tanks, 6 armoured personnel carriers, several vehicles with infantry. The anti-aircraft division shot down 3 enemy airplanes, MiSA-109. From the memoirs of the veteran of the division, retired Colonel G.A. Aristakes. Heavy bloody battles. The offensive of our division on Debrecen is suspended. The command needs updated information about the defending enemy on the southeastern approaches to the city. At dawn on October 9, 1944, Private Manatsakanian, with a group of 4 men, was sent on reconnaissance to the area of the village of Monstopai, which is 15 kilometers from Debrecen. When approaching the village of Vertes, the group was suddenly fired on by the fascists from the tower of a Catholic church. An unequal battle ensued, during which the scout V. Matsakanian was mortally wounded. Disregarding the danger and risking their own lives, the inhabitants of the village of Vertes, Shandor Kozma, and his son Dulia Kozma crawled along the ditch to the Soviet soldier lying by the roadside. They with difficulty unclenched his fingers, clutching a machine gun. Hungarian patriots carefully carried Matsakanian's body to their house and buried it in the orchard near an old apple tree. And in the fall of 1945, Hungarian friends transferred the ashes of the Soviet soldier to the village of Nagalita and buried him in a mass grave together with 8 other heroes. For almost a quarter of a century, neither his old mother nor his younger brother Shmavon Matsakanian, a geological engineer now living in Yerevan, knew about the circumstances of his death and burial place. The notice sent to his mother from the unit in 1944 said, "Your son Varazdat Konstantinovich Matsakanian was killed while performing a combat mission." And only on the eve of celebration of the 25th anniversary of the liberation of Hungary from fascism, through the board of the Society of Hungarian Soviet Friendship, Matsakanian's relatives learned about the circumstances of his death, and the place of burial. Since then, Matasakinian Jr. has been a frequent guest of Hungarian friends. On the granite monument of the fraternal grave of Soviet soldiers, erected by grateful residents of the village of Nagyaleta, a marble slab delivered from Yerevan, symbolizing the friendship of the Hungarian and Soviet peoples, is brick. Developing success, regiments of the division began to pursue the enemy. The smaller became the German bridgehead on the eastern bank of the river Tisza. The fiercer was the resistance of the fascists. The hotter were the battles. After days of fighting on November 2, the division stormed the town of Polgar. The Germans retreated to the western bank of the river Tisza. In the battle for the town of Polgar, especially distinguished the division's sappers. Humble toilers of war, these are the words they call sappers. Without their labour, full of hourly risk, determination and heroism, no kind of troops can do without. Whether to clear the way for our infantry in front of the enemy defence, whether to make passages through minefields for tanks, whether to secure the search for scouts, whether to create mine barriers, whether to arrange a crossing over the waterline, everywhere need the caring hands of sappers. The difficulty and danger of the sapper's labour could be compared to the combat flight of a fighter pilot. And now the enemy, trying to hold the city, mined all the approaches to it. To make passages in minefields for infantry and tanks was the task of sappers. Platoon of Lieutenant Pavel Pavlovich Supranenko removed 250 different mines, including a lot of combined mines, thus clearing the way to the city for infantry and tanks. Having finished this operation, the division units, having made a 100-kilometre march down the river Tisza, Polgar Kunhodges, on November 4 concentrated in the area of Tisarov and began to prepare for forcing the river Tisza. The task was very difficult. The enemy had on the west bank of the river a whole system of defensive structures. Continuous trenches were dug in full profile, bunkers were built. All approaches to the river and the river itself were shot by artillery and machine gun fire. The Germans counted on the Tis to stop the advance of the Red Army. The division with heavy fighting forced the river Tisza, and on the night of November 6 took a small bridgehead on the west bank near the village of Tisza B. And immediately, despite heavy enemy fire, the ferry crossing prepared in advance by sappers on the east bank of the river was emptied. The 1,243rd 1,245th Infantry Regiment, supported by the 932nd Artillery Regiment, crossed the river and entered the battle from the start, began to expand the bridgehead step by step. The next day a hot battle broke out for the village of Tisza. The 3rd Rifle Battalion of the 1,243rd Rifle Regiment was assigned the task to occupy the dominant height 599. The battalion commander, Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Kuzmik Korobkov, ordered Lieutenant Maxim Andreyevich Vdovchenko and his company to enter the enemy's flank and to knock the Germans off the height by a surprise attack. After appropriate preparation, the commander of the 9th Rifle Company, Vdovchenko, at midnight raised the soldiers and led them to the initial position for the attack. Acting according to the commander's plan, the company unexpectedly for the enemy struck in the flank. The enemy, stunned by the sudden blow and boldness of the soldiers, could not withstand and began to withdraw. However, scattered groups of Hitlerites tried to gain a foothold on the top of the height. From the height hit the machine gun. The gunners lay down. It was impossible to raise their heads. But 2 fighters, clinging to the ground, crawled. In front, machine gunner Fyodor Stepanovich Chernyuk, followed by Red Army man Porfiry Ivanovich Shitikov. Soon they came close to the machine gun point of the enemy, destroyed its calculation, and, having seized a serviceable machine gun, opened fire from it on the fleeing Hitlerites. The soldiers reached the top of the height. Chernyuk hoisted the red flag. Scarlet cloth fluttered in the wind, inspiring the soldiers. The battle continued deep in the enemy's defence. Soon the 1,243rd Infantry Regiment broke into the village of Tisza. We suffered heavy losses. Many wounded men were saved by our orderly. Orderly, how much courage, bravery, warmth of heart a man of this seemingly mundane, insignificant profession must have in war. But where the noise of battle rattles over the field, where shells and mines burst with a rumble, he crawls on the ground, in the snow, disregarding the deadly danger, disregarding his own life to save a wounded soldier. I have already mentioned that on the western bank of the Tisza River, a particularly hot battle was fought over the village of Tisza. which had about 500 yards, and almost every one of them was occupied by enemy machine gunners, and the steam mill and sawmill were turned into strongholds, from where the enemy directed artillery, mortar and machine gun fire at the advancing troops. The orderly of the 2nd Battalion of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment, Komsomol Sergeant Nina Sherentsova, adjusting a sanitary bag with a red cross, was moving in short runs in the fighting order of the attacking rifle company. Here she saw a soldier crouching on a hillside. She ran up to him and dressed his wound. Almost at her ear, a bullet rang out. Nina fell to the ground, crawled to another wounded man. "Well, is he alive?" asked the nurse, and, dropping down next to him, began to quickly pull out of her bag an individual bag. The wounded man looked at the girl's flushed face, at the lock of light blonde wavy hair that hung down on his tanned forehead, and "Sis, duck down. You hear the whistling." "My, bear with me, everything will be fine now," she said, bandaging the wounds of both of the fighter's shot legs. Seeing with what calmness the girl was working, the soldier stopped moaning, only clenched his teeth tight. This calmness did not come to her at once. For the first time she heard the bursting of shells near Rashev. Then Nina pressed herself to the ground, closed her eyes, although the shells were not close. Komsomolka Cherentsova passed along the front roads thousands of kilometers together with her Ural division. She was always there, where the hot battles were boiling, where life and death were near, provided medical assistance on the battlefield to soldiers and officers. Those who at least once had to carry the seriously wounded knows how difficult, how hard it is to do, and this short girl pulled out from under fire more than 100 seriously wounded and saved their lives in the battles of Rysev, Kursk, Bulge, behind the Dnieper, near Korsun-Shevchenkovsky. And not by chance Nina was awarded the Order of the Red Banner, Red Star, the Medal for Bravery. And this time she carefully put the severely wounded on a cloak tent, hung his automatic rifle on his neck, and crawled. The mines began to lie down even thicker. It seemed that the fascists were shooting only at her. One enemy splinter stung Nina in the shoulder. The soldier noticed how her overcoat turned white with blood. "Sister, leave me alone. You're wounded yourself," the soldier said quietly. "Leave you? What are you saying?" Never, no matter how life-threatening it was. Cherentsova never left the wounded without help and carried them out of any scorcher. And now she, gathering her last strength, dragged the wounded one further. She carried him through the downpour of fire and handed him over to the infirmary, and only then she felt the searing pain of her wound. She was treated and bandaged. It was her 5th wound. 5 times Nina shed blood, saving the lives of others. Cherentsova was often in the trenches. As an agitator and commissar of the sanitary company, talked to the soldiers. Always tidy, girlishly graceful. Even a soldier's uniform somehow unusually well sat on Nina. When meeting with her, every soldier had a light at heart. Affectionate smile involuntarily lit up her face. She was respected and loved like a sister. "Do you know what our Nina is like?" said an elderly soldier Ivan Borisov to the young soldier Mikhail Guryanov. "If you are badly wounded in battle, she will pull you out of any fire. Nina is a proper girl, don't stare at her." And how many warm, heartfelt letters she received from soldiers and officers from hospitals. Warriors thanked her for the fact that she saved their lives. One day, the instructor of the political department of the Division on Information, Captain Alexander Ilyich Kuzmin, handed me a letter, which was written by Lieutenant Maltzy from the hospital. "I convincingly ask you, Comrade Colonel, when you have a chance, personally convey from me a big thank you to Nina Cherentsova, a sister from our battalion. The doctors say that if I had not been taken from the battlefield in time, I would have died. Comrade Colonel, it was Nina Cherentsova who pulled me out of the battlefield under machine gun fire. All my life I will be grateful to this charming, courageous girl in a soldier's overcoat." Only I did not have time to convey this gratitude to her. The letter came too late. In the battle near the village of Tisashul, carrying the 12th wounded man from the battlefield, Nina died. This tragic news quickly spread among the advancing troops. Warriors passed each other vows to avenge Nina's life. The battle lasted until the evening of November 8. The resistance of the enemy was broken. Many fascists were destroyed by soldiers of the 2nd Battalion. The village of Tisashayl was liberated. In its center was buried Nina Kirillovna Cherentsova. For a long time the soldiers stood by a small hill. They could not believe that there was no person among them who, disregarding the mortal danger, under the devastating enemy fire, saved the lives of many dozens of wounded soldiers. For their lives, Nina Kirillovna Cherentsova gave her own. The faithful daughter of the Soviet people honestly fulfilled her duty to the motherland. The division commander, Major General Karpukin, on behalf of the Soviet government, awarded her posthumously with the Second Order of the Red Star.
I would like to finish my story about Nina with verses that were printed in the army newspaper.
When he fell on the field, battlefield, and not in verse, but in real life, I suddenly saw, above me, a living gaze, blue. When she bent down,
Over me?
my sister. The pain was at once, not the say, not so strong, not so less sharp. I felt as if I was sprinkled with life-giving water. It's as if over me, Russia bowed her russet head over me. I happened to witness many heroic deeds of our orderlies of rifle companies who went together with soldiers into battle under the bursts of enemy shells, mines and hail of bullets, crawled to the call of the wounded. They crawled to the place where every minute or even second could become fatal for the wounded. They went to their deaths for the life of others. I told only about Nina, but such modest and brave as Nina, medical workers, doctors, paramedics, nurses, orderlies and communicators, we had 108 women in our division in 1944. They earned the appreciation and love of the soldiers of the division. Each of them honorably fulfilled their duty, performed a feat at their combat post. The officer of medical service, Tatiana Alexandrovna Golubniknaya, at the front since 1941. With the advanced units of the 1245th Infantry Regiment, forced the Dnieper in heavy battles on the bridgehead all the time, was in the fighting order, provided medical care to numerous wounded. In the battles near Zenogorod, she pulled out 25 wounded men from under enemy fire, for which she was awarded the Medal for Bravery. The telephonist of the 1243rd and 43rd Infantry Regiment, Lydia Ivanovna Ostapenko, ensured uninterrupted communication of the regiment commander with the units. When once the command post was surrounded by the Germans, she did not leave her post, and with a machine gun repelled the attacking fascists. She was killed by a machine gun burst from an enemy tank. Reza Valitova, a sanitary worker of the 932nd Artillery Regiment, was constantly at the firing positions, rendering medical aid to the wounded. While dressing a wounded man, she was killed by a splinter of an enemy shell. Taisia Dmitrievna Smetankina from the village of Gari, Sverdlovsk region, a liaison officer of the 3rd Division of the 932nd Artillery Regiment, kept a working connection with the firefighters in any battle conditions. In the battles near the town of Kotovsky, being wounded, she did not leave her post until the end of the battle. Orderly Peter Chukin received 5 wounds at the front, saved the lives of hundreds of wounded soldiers. From the heat of battle, he carried the seriously wounded with weapons. He was called the brave among the brave in the platoon. In the battles he was accepted into the party. He was awarded the Order of Glory, II degree. Having forded the River Tisa, having repulsed numerous enemy counterattacks on its western bank, and having liberated dozens of settlements, the division, together with other army formations, rushed to pursue the enemy in the northwestern direction, scorched by the sun, soaked in gunpowder smoke, sweeping away the fascist scum on their way. The soldiers of the division marched forward through Hungary. How much courage, bravery, self-sacrifice they showed in battles for the victory, heroes, a title to them, soldiers of the Ural Division. On December 4, 1944, the commander of the 1st Rifle Battalion, the 1243rd Rifle Regiment, Captain Vasily Nikolaevich Bukayev, received an order to surrender the line in the area of Yukaskas and take the initial position for the offensive in the direction of the settlement of Syuchi and height 510. After appropriate preparation, the battalion went forward. There seemed to be no reason for concern. The offensive was going as well as possible. The battalion successfully attacked the enemy at height 510 and, developing the offensive, came to the road junctions. The terrain allowed here to stubbornly defend, but for some reason the Germans did not resist. What would that mean? Pondered Combat Bukayev. Apparently it's a trap. The enemy wants to draw us into a firebag and then go on the counterattack, pondered the commander. To this conclusion, he was also led by the fact that Cent Intelligence reported that the Nazis concentrated close to the flanks. Additional organized reconnaissance led by Junior Lieutenant Semyon Ivanovich Sotnikov confirmed it. It turned out that pulling into the valley, the battalion fell into a fire trap prepared by the Nazis in advance. Realizing that the enemy went to the cunning, Captain Bukayev decided to strengthen the flanks and worthy to answer him. And so it turned out. When the first company began to approach Shuchi, the enemy increased resistance. Simultaneously, from the direction of Diendoshpat and Shuchi, the enemy launched a counterattack, expecting to strike from both sides to cut off the battalion and destroy it. The counterattack was strong, and who knows how the situation could have turned out if the battalion commander, Captain Bukayev, had not taken the necessary measures to strengthen their flanks in time. The battle ended with the enemy forcing the first company away from Shuchi, but suffered heavy losses, encountering resistance on the flanks. The counterattack was repulsed. For 2 days there was fierce fighting at Shuchi. The enemy made fierce counterattacks by tanks and infantry, but had no success. Each time the counterattacks were repulsed. This episode from the experience of the battalion of the 1,243rd Rifle Regiment showed the tactical foresight of the battalion commander, Captain Bukayev, his ability to understand, feel the thread of the battle, and in time to take the necessary measures to repel the counterattack of the Germans. Vasily Nikolaevich has been at the front since 1941. His experience and knowledge of the enemy tactics and the capabilities of his forces allowed him to successfully repel the counterattack from the flanks. He was awarded 3 orders, including the Order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. In these battles, the gun crew of the twice-decorated Communist Sergeant Nikolai Yakovlevich Markin distinguished itself. The counter-attacking tanks of the enemy were very close to our fighting orders. When the gun crew rolled out its gun on direct aiming, the gunner, Junior Sergeant Joseph Antonovich Svidorsky, quickly pointed the gun, and the shells flew at the enemy. Soon the lead tank went up in smoke. The rest of the tanks tried to penetrate to our infantry, but met by heavy artillery and fire from anti-tank guns, having lost 2 more tanks hit, turned back. 1 tank was hit by Junior Sergeant Nikolai Prokopenko. The division fought for the town of Diendish. What was this town? It was one of the medium-sized cities of Hungary, located 82 kilometers northeast of the Hungarian capital Budapest. From the north it adjoined the Carpathian Mountains. The population was about 220,000 people. Around the city, large plantations of grapes. It was a typical commercial city. There were a brickyard, parquet factory, coal mines, quarries, 3 steam mills, distillery, etc. in the city. All of them were adapted for defense. Several days continued fighting for the city. Only on November 18, in cooperation with the cavalry and mechanized group of General Pleve, with persistent fighting captured the city and approached the Matra Mountains. Any battle, every battle, wherever they took place, is fire, blood, death, nevertheless. When you think about the battles in different areas, involuntarily arise in the memory of pictures that differ from each other. This time the division was tasked with fighting in a mountainous and forested area. In the mountains everything is more complicated than on the plain. It is difficult to make passages in minefields, to overcome anti-tank ditches, to ensure reliable communication. The battle often breaks up into separate foci, and then it takes a special commander's art not to miss the threads of control. The division commander organized classes with officers to study the terrain on which the battle was to be fought, the peculiarities of combat in mountainous and wooded terrain, the use of bypass maneuvers. A number of talks were held with the personnel on the peculiarities of fighting in mountainous and wooded terrain. In these conversations, special attention was paid to the need for mutual assistance and help. On December 11, the 1st Battalion of the 1,241st Infantry Regiment was given the task to bypass through the Matra Mountains to the village of Zadvesentiakab and attack the enemy from the rear. The task was difficult. It was also complicated by the fact that the battalion had to break away from its rear, so it was necessary to take with it a stock of food and ammunition. The battalion commander, Senior Lieutenant Alexander Alexandrovich Uryopin, first of all called the command staff, told about the complexity of the task, about what to take with them and what to leave in place, paid special attention to the preparation of people, to the fitting of equipment. Before the performance, personally went around all units, checked weapons, ammunition and food. Deputy Battalion Commander on political part, Senior Lieutenant Sergei Karlamovich Chizikov, and Battalion Part or Junior Lieutenant Tamraz Sudayev gathered communists and Komsomol members, set them a task to ensure the implementation of the order. At first, the way of the battalion lay through the valley. It breathed fog and lived with anxiety. It was easy to move. It began to rise. The sun was beating down, and sweat was streaming on the uniforms. The battalion was in a hurry. A sapper ahead of them found mines. The sapper began his dangerous work. In a few minutes, the battalion again moved on the road. After half a kilometre again stopped. "Today trap," thought European. "It is possible that on this road we are waiting for the Nazis." Combat looked at the map and saw There is no other road. Only to mines. Only under bullets. Senior Lieutenant European folded the map, and then he heard muffled by distance and forest sounds of shooting in the gorge. European's mind beat tensely in search of a solution. "We can go, Comrade Combat," reported the sapper. "We can go, but not on this path. Here ahead of us waiting for the Germans. We will go here," gestured towards the mountain peak. The battalion went to the top of the steep cliff, tearing off their nails and scraping their knees to blood. But it was still a long way to the top. The reconnaissance ahead reported that the Nazis were at the height. Senior Lieutenant European, although it was not part of his task to engage in battle on the way, decided not to leave behind an organized enemy, but to destroy it. Having deployed the battalion, he surrounded the height, cut off all outlets to the enemy, after which he seized the height with a swift attack, destroying the Nazis who were on the height. Under cover of night, the battalion descended from the mountains and suddenly attacked the Germans in the settlement. The appearance of our soldiers was so unexpected for the Germans that it caused complete confusion. Taking advantage of this, the battalion burst into the populated area from where the enemy did not expect. However, having regained their senses, the enemy launched a series of fierce counterattacks, seeking to drive European's battalion out of the settlement into the open. 7 counterattacks were repulsed during the day. By evening, European decided to deceive the enemy. He, demonstrating a false withdrawal, left to cover one platoon, and himself with the battalion, making a detour maneuver, struck from the north side. The battle continued until deep into the night. Thereby, he created a threat to cut off the Germans' escape routes. Red Army soldier Andrei Prokopievich Sivolap distinguished himself. Twice concussed, he continued to destroy enemy fire points from his hand machine gun. Sergeant Nerevsky went around the house from where the Germans were firing and threw grenades at them. The battalion commissar Junior Lieutenant Petr Vasilievich Gavrikov, at a difficult time for the battalion, went to the fighting order, and by personal example inspired the soldiers to repel the counterattack, personally exterminated many fascists. Taking advantage of the success of European's battalion, the 1241st Regiment attacked the settlement from the southeast and cleared Zadvasentikab and Suropeshenki. The battalion of Senior Lieutenant Anzar Alexandrovich European was still repeatedly distinguished by its boldness, ability to beat the enemy and in other battles on the territory of Hungary and Czechoslovakia, but these victories cost the battalion dearly. Many soldiers gave their lives and were wounded, including in the battles near the village of Majula in Hungary on January 12, 1945, died deputy commander of the battalion on the political part of Senior Lieutenant Sergei Kalamovich Chivsikov, who was awarded many orders. His wife Klavdia Tikhonovna lives in Rostov region in the village Lyon. Younger Lieutenant Tamraz Shayogli Sulayev, an Azerbaijani, was seriously wounded. Company Commander Junior Lieutenant Mikhail Ivanovich Atamanov, Battalion Commissar Junior Lieutenant Pyotr Vasilievich Gavrikov, Company Commander Lieutenant Nikolai Nikolaevich Pashchenko, Sergeant Miran Solomonovich Kazanovsky, and many others were wounded. During 1944, the Soviet Army defeated and put out of action 136 German fascist divisions, of which more than 70 divisions were encircled and destroyed. In fact, in the summer of 1944, the war could no longer be won. It could only be prolonged. So writes Kurt von Tippel-Skirch, a retired infantry general who served his Führer Hitler faithfully, and who ended the war as an army commander in Mecklenburg, where he surrendered among other prominent Hitler generals to the British as a prisoner of war. After the war, he wrote a book, A History of World War II, written from the perspective of a Nazi general, taking into account the views of reactionary circles in the United States and England. He wrote that despite the threat of invasion of Anglo-American troops in Western Europe, Hitler's command continued to hold by the end of 1943 on the Soviet German front 257 divisions, while in France and Italy were only about 75 divisions. So from the beginning to the end of the Patriotic War, the Soviet-German front was the main front where the fate of the Second World War was decided. From the memoirs of the veteran of the division, retired Colonel G.A. Aristeichim, it was a fine March day in 1945. A panting Salashist soldier burst into the office of the chief of police and, fetting the greeting, shouted, "Meister Captain, the Russians." From the east came more and more clearly the rumble of tank engines. But before rushing to escape, the captain ordered to immediately blow up the stone bridge over the River Zala. 2 gendarmes rushed to the outskirts of the village to attach Bigfoot cord to the charges and set it on fire. Soviet tanks appeared on the road. Staff Sergeant Kavdam Katamov, who was in the lead vehicle, saw the 2 gendarmes ducking under the stone vaults of the bridge. The cord was already smoking. A tongue of flame was hissing toward a bundle of tow. After a second's thought, Katamov jumped out of the tank and rushed forward. A few centimeters separated fire from explosives, life from death. Having cut the cord, the senior sergeant ran up to the bridge and waved his hand. "The way is clear." At that time a machine gun line rang out. 5 bullets pierced the hero's chest with roan. We drove up to the bridge and approached the marble slab attached to the granite. The interpreter read the inscription, emphasizing each word. This bridge was mined by German fascists at the end of the Second World War. On March 28, 1945, on the day of the liberation of Zalesindgrota, the Soviet army soldier Kavdam Katamov prevented the explosion at the cost of his life. At the joint solemn meeting of the district and village councils, dedicated to the 20th anniversary of the liberation of Zalesindgrota from the Nazi invaders, it was decided to name this bridge Katamov's Bridge. The name of the senior sergeant is also carved on the monument near the village council building. Battles on the western bank of the River Grone. On January 2, 1945, the division, by order of the commander of the 2nd Ukrainian Front Marshal of the Soviet Union Radon Yakovlevich, Malinovsky, left the 53rd Army and joined the 7th Guards Army commanded by Colonel General Mikhail Stepanovich Shumilov. 7th Guards Army was preparing for an offensive on the western bank of the River Grone to expand the bridgehead in the direction to the city of Komarno, to prevent the enemy from pulling up their forces to help the grouping surrounded by our troops in the city of Budapest. So the Germans fiercely fought to break through to their own and join up in Budapest. The entire apparatus of the division, headquarters, political department, command and political staff, party and Komsomol organizations, rear units, was put into action in preparation for the battle. The work was envisaged in all details. It was carried out in a strictly coordinated, purposeful manner. Every minute counted. Wet flakes of snow fell on the ground, laying on the fields torn by shells, tracks of tanks. On the night of January 5, 1945, the regiments of the division replaced parts of the 409th Infantry Division on the western bank of the River Grone, came into contact with parts of the 8th Infantry Division of the enemy, and began 375th Infantry Division with 1431 Laps in cooperation with units of the 6th Tank Army to break through the enemy's defense. To develop success at St. Mugila, Bush by 9.0 on 6.1 to take possession of the highway to Betarovo Kays to Nam. Further to advance in the general direction to Shrabova, Hetin, to seize the bank of the river Nitra at the boundary. On the right 40 SD, on the left 58 SD. With the onset of darkness on January 6, the personnel were fed a hot dinner and before the offensive were given 300 grams of sausage or boiled meat and 150-200 grams of vodka. At 3 a.m., without artillery preparation, suddenly regiments of the division began to storm the fortified lines of the Germans with the task to expand the bridgehead and cut off the enemy's communications between Budapest and Esztergom to deprive the Nazis of the opportunity to bring reserves to the rescue of the grouping surrounded in Budapest. The division, advancing along the northern bank of the Danube River, in cooperation with neighbours, captured 9 settlements, captured 208 Hitlerites, including 1 lieutenant colonel, took 5 tanks, 4 armoured personnel carriers, 12 vehicles. It is impossible to describe the fierceness of German counterattacks and persistence of our soldiers to repel them. In the battles for the village of Bala 1000, 245th Infantry Regiment made a detour manoeuvre and hit the enemy from the rear, captured a staff car with documents. 2 officers and several dozen German and Hungarian soldiers were captured on the approaches to the village. Up to 70 Germans and Magyars raised the white flag. But when ours stopped firing and began to approach them, they opened a barrage of fire from all kinds of weapons. For this provocation they paid with their lives. Many were destroyed, and some of them, together with the transport and 4 motorcycles, were taken prisoner. During the provocation, the commander of the 1st Company, Senior Lieutenant Ivan Yakovlevich Zubchenko, and several soldiers were killed. Platoon Commander Junior Lieutenant Semyon Ivanovich Sovnikov took command of the company and led the company forward to the enemy. On January 7, 1243rd Rifle Regiment took the settlement of Batarovo-Kesi. The Germans attached special importance to this settlement as it stood on their supply route. Several times the Germans counterattacked to retake Batarovo-Kesi, but they encountered the iron fortitude of soldiers of the 1243rd Infantry Regiment. Having suffered heavy losses, the fascists rolled back. The regiment took 38 soldiers and officers prisoner, pursuing the enemy. The company of Lieutenant Nikolai Trofimovich Trufanov broke far ahead and seized a tactically important height. Sir Comrade Lieutenant, our other companies could not advance further. The battalion commander ordered to consolidate on this height. Trufanov was informed by a contact who arrived. The company commander gathered the platoon commanders and told the enemy will seek to regain the lost line in Batarovo-Kesi. Our task is to hold the height. No sooner had the platoons taken firing positions than enemy tanks and infantry appeared, coming to the height. The forces were unequal, but no one trembled. The company prepared to meet the Hitlerites. Many fighters not once had to meet one-on-one with enemy tanks in past battles. The company had on its account several tanks and armoured personnel carriers. When Hitlerites came to a close distance, Sergeant Sergeyev opened fire from a machine gun, and other soldiers opened fire after him. The fascists, pressed against the tanks, continued to move forward. Tanks were firing on the move. 2 tanks came almost close to the trenches of the soldiers, and immediately grenades and bottles with flammable mixture flew into them. One and then the 2nd tank caught fire. The infantry was mowed down by machine guns and machine guns. The attack was repulsed. But the company also suffered losses. Sergeant Sergeyev was killed. Soldiers Abdrakhmanov, Kutsenko, Petrenko, and others were wounded. The Hitlerites will not leave us alone, said the company commander, Lieutenant Trufanov. We should be ready for new fights. And true, after a while the fascists and Magyars began to attack. By this time, behind the company stood in firing position 2 guns of the 1st Battery of the 932nd Artillery Regiment. They opened fire on the tanks. The Nazis, having lost 1 more tank, hit by Sergeant Ivan Alexievich Nerovny's unit, and many of their soldiers rolled back. Angered by the failure, Hitlerites opened hurricane artillery fire on the height and rushed into a new attack. As soon as they approached the company's trenches, the soldiers opened fire on the Nazis. Artillery hit the tanks. Suddenly the company commander stood up, shouted "Beat the bastards," and threw a grenade under the tracks of the tank. The tank turned around and stopped, but at the same time Lieutenant Nikolai Trofimovich Trufanov was hit by an enemy machine gun. Tamraz Suleyev, the patriarch of the battalion, who was in the company in this battle, taking command of the company, led it in a counterattack against the fascists, and the company broke into the station Muzhla. In these battles, the penalty battalion, under the command of Communist Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Grigorievich Kashpanov, acted well. The battalion at night broke into the village of Buch, struck a strong blow to the enemy, and panic rose in the camp of the Germans. Undressed Germans and Hungarians jumped out of the houses, shooting at random, rushing through the streets in search of an exit. But Buch was surrounded. Part of the enemy soldiers were exterminated and 50 were taken prisoner. Our soldiers captured 6 vehicles loaded with military property, 4 armoured personnel carriers, 1 Panther tank. Red Army man Dmitry Nikolaevich Vospelnikov noticed that the enemy's armoured personnel carrier began to fire. He climbed up to it, jumped on the vehicle with a grenade in his hands and shouted, "Surrender, you bastards, or kaput you." The Germans understood the word kaput well. They were confused. The crew raised their hands. The armoured personnel carrier with the crew was 2 officers and 7 enemy soldiers were captured that night by Private Vasily Sezonov. After the battle, the distinguished penalized soldiers were presented to have their convictions expunged, and some of them were awarded. The nervous tension of the fighters was growing by the minute, and it was not surprising. Before the 1241st Rifle Regiment, commanded by Major Vladimir Grigorievich Atamanov, the task was not easy. It was necessary to break through the defence, where the Hitlerites and Hungarian hortisti, reinforced by tanks and artillery, to seize the stronghold and, developing the offensive, to seize the settlement. In the pre-dawn sky, a signal rocket drew an arc, and immediately everything came into motion. The silence was broken by artillery and mortar fire. Behind the rampart came out of the trenches gunners and machine gunners, rushed into the attack. As the attackers overcame the bushes and came to the open ground, the enemy stronghold came to life, talked firing points. It was impossible to delay a minute. The commander of the 1st Rifle Company, Junior Lieutenant Abrosimov, understood it perfectly well. It was enough to look carefully at the terrain to make sure that the offensive area of his company was the most favourable to hit the stronghold from the flank. He made a quick calculum to move slightly to the left and strike in the flank. He reported his plan to the battalion commander, Senior Lieutenant Yuryupin. Having received permission, led his company to bypass the stronghold. At this time, the main forces of the regiment in the centre were engaged in battle. When Vitaly Ivanovich Abrosimov's company came to the intended boundary with a rapid rush, the company commander saw that Hitlerites concentrated their main attention in the centre of the defence, leaving only insignificant forces in the flanks. The company struck the enemy from the flank. The battle started. A number of firing points were destroyed. 2 mortars firing at our soldiers were captured. Taking advantage of the success of Abrosimov's company, the main forces broke through the first line of German defence. Realizing the danger of the situation, the enemy launched a counterattack with its reserve. Soldiers of the regiment, steadfastly repelling the counterattack, broke into the centre of the stronghold, successfully continuing the offensive, cleared from Hitlerites the settlement Novdayala. In this battle, the artillerymen of the 1st Division, commanded by the communist Captain Potkin, acted perfectly. By this time, the division had on its account more than 50 enemy tanks shot down during the war. This time it added 3 more. The 3rd Division of Captain Kishnikov hit 1 tank and destroyed 3 machine gun points. In the cloudy days of January, the weather changed from hour to hour. It was drizzling rain. Then the sun instantly looked out of the leaden clouds. Then suddenly, as through a huge sieve, snow fell, and then it became dark, just like after sunset. Having broken the resistance of the Germans, regiments of the division, in cooperation with parts of the 409th and 58th Infantry Divisions of the 7th Guards Army, supported by tanks and aviation, developing the offensive, occupied dozens of settlements and approached Komorno. Having occupied the settlements of Peribet, Dela Station, Tayankol, the division consolidated on this line and began to repel enemy counterattacks. Day after day, the Germans strengthened counterattacks against our division, tried to throw it behind Gron. In some days, Hitlerites undertook 10-15 counterattacks with the support of tanks, self-propelled vehicles, and aviation. Our soldiers exterminated, exhausted the enemy, repulsed all counterattacks. True heroism and ability to lead the personnel in repulsing counterattacks showed political workers and communists. At the critical moment of the battle on January 29, Junior Lieutenant K.F. Naznamov, a native of Turinsk district of the Sverdlovsk region, went to the firing positions of the 1st Battery. He, by personal example, inspired the soldiers to courageously repel counterattacks of enemy tanks. That day, the battery shot down 2 tanks. When the gun commander of one calculation was wounded, Naznamov took command. The calculation hit the tank. In single combat with another tank, Kornei Fomish Naznamov was mortally wounded. The enemy desperately resisted. The Germans well understood that for them the loss of such an important hub of railroads and highways as Komorno would accelerate the liquidation of the encircled Budapest group, and the loss of the last vassal of Germany, Hungary. In Budapest were surrounded 188,000 Hitlerite grouping with numerous equipment, with large stocks of weapons and ammunition. Therefore, the fascists, not considering any losses, threw more and more manpower and equipment into the battle. They clung to every line, to every settlement. They were forced to throw against the 7th Guards Army, hence against our division. The Tank Reserve and 53rd Infantry Divisions included in this army, intended to help the Budapest encircled group, also stopped another armoured division, which was on its way by rail from Berlin to help the encircled in Budapest. According to intelligence, it was found that the Germans were preparing for a counter-offensive by large forces. before the regiments and supporting units were tasked to be ready to repel the enemy attack. Officers of the division headquarters, regiment's political department were constantly in the units, assisted commanders and personnel in preparing for the upcoming battle. Division Commander General Karpukian more and more worried about the enemy's behavior. He ordered the Chief of Staff Colonel Kaloshinu Forces Reconnaissance Company to organize continuous surveillance of the enemy, to create a system of observation points that would provide a complete visual control of the enemy grouping, not only in the front line, but also in the nearest tactical depth. In addition, it is necessary to get the tongue. Colonel Alexei Alexandrovich Kaloshin called to himself the commander of the Divisional Reconnaissance Company, Senior Lieutenant Peter Pavlovich Chuklomin, gave him the appropriate instructions on the organization of observation posts, and ordered to organize a search for the capture of the language, indicated the place of its conduct. During 3 days, the scouts studied the approaches, the system of fire, non-fire areas, behavior and routine of the enemy. One day, the scouts noticed a small detail in the enemy's behavior, repeatedly repeated. Before entering one of the dugouts, located behind in 30-40 meters from the first line, before entering, the soldier necessarily stopped and corrected his uniform and automatic rifle. Senior Lieutenant Chuklomin decided to attack this dugout and there to take the tongue. On the night of February 1, sappers made a passage in the minefield, and suppressed on it the group of capture moved in a chain. The party leader of the company, Petty Officer Ivan Ivanovich Ferisov, Komsomol members Terent Yurov, Anatoly Fedorovich Shevos, Pavel Stepanovich Likomanyuk, Grigory Mikhailovich Smyridjan. Behind the group of capture moved a supporting group of 7 people. They crept silently, carefully, with stops, afraid of the slightest noise to wake up the pre-morning silence. The scouts approached the intended object. At that time, the moon peeked out from behind the clouds. Private Yurov noticed a Hitlerite's head that appeared above the bunker. "Let's wait a little," said Senior Lieutenant Chuklomin, seeing that a cloud was coming. The black tips of the clock hands lazily crept to the long illuminated phosphorus figures. Here they formed a right angle. Chuklomin put the watch in his pocket. Soon it went dark again. Senior Lieutenant decided to go around the object of search on the right. He clarified the task to soldiers. "Let's go, guys," he said quietly and calmly. The group crawled forward. Dry branches of the vineyard clung to their clothes, scratched their hands. Ivan Petrovich Karitunov and Pyotr Sergeyevich Samukin broke away from the group. They had to cover the capture group from the rear, not to let the Germans cut off the escape routes. The capture group penetrated between the first dugouts and surrounded the distant dugout. Chuklomin elbow pushed a soldier lying next to him. This, the second, third in a chain, a silent signal to throw. T. Officer Verisov and Private Yurov silently entered the dugout and resolutely shouted, "Natin Th." They took the half-sleeping officer, stunned by the suddenness. Suddenly a machine gun burst. At the signal of the company commander, the group rushed to the enemy trenches. A hand-to-hand fight ensued. Hitlerites who jumped out of other dugouts were mowed down by Akhmed Kakimov's machine gun and machine gun fire of soldiers of the support group. In hand-to-hand fight, bravely fought Private Shets, Lukmanyuk, Styridin, who killed many Hitlerites and captured one more crowd. On enemy positions, the alarm was raised. Indiscriminate firing broke out. Rockets soared into the sky. But the scouts, without fussing, on the same passage without losses, returned to themselves. The entire group was awarded orders and medals, and Senior Lieutenant Chuklomin was presented with the Order of Alexander Nevsky. "Well done," Ocean told them. "Well done, you guys are eagles." Here is what wrote about these battles, conducted by the division on January 6-7, 1945, the head of the political department of the 7th Guards Army, Major General Zykor. Our troops fought offensive battles between the rivers Gron and Nitra. The enemy offered strong resistance and undertook counterattacks. On this section of the front well acted Kharkov-Bucharest Rifle Division, where the head of the political department, Colonel Anatnov, with the receipt of the combat task, was held briefing with the workers of the political department. In the primary party organizations held meetings, discussed the issue of the role of communists in bringing the combat task to the personnel, and their personal example in the successful implementation of the commander's order. There were Komsomol meetings, instructing agitators, Red Army rallies and meetings with the question with honor to fulfill the assigned combat task. There were meetings of artillerymen, mortarmen, tankers, and infantrymen on cooperation in the offensive. The division newspaper issued a special leaflet interaction of infantry units with tanks. Due to the fact that it was to operate at night, the personnel were held taught on the peculiarities of the offensive at night without artillery preparation. Briefings were held with doctors and other medical workers. Appropriate work was carried out in the rear units. The work carried out gave its result. The bold throw regiments of the division broke the resistance of the enemy and began to pursue him. Rifle Regiment, where the commander hero of the Soviet Union, Major Spirin, using a detour maneuver, captured from the enemy staff car with documents and 2 staff officers. That Italian of Senior Lieutenant Kashpanov only for 1 day took 50 prisoners and captured 2 settlements. The head of the political department of the 7th Guards, Army Major General Zykov. Memorable other battles from February 17 to 20, 1945. In the morning of February 17, the silence was sharply broken by the volleys of numerous enemy guns and mortars. Shells, mines with a screech, flew over the heads of soldiers of the units of the 1245th Infantry Regiment. The Germans began artillery preparation. For more than an hour, they were frantically firing at our positions. The whole neighborhood was covered with deep craters. No less fierce fire, they were firing on the positions of our right neighbor, the 409th Infantry Division. No sooner had the artillery cannonade subsided than a huge flock of enemy bombers appeared in the air and dropped their cargo on our positions. All the music of death was supplemented by the roar of tank engines and the scraping of their track. Hiding behind the armor were enemy machine gunners. The artillerymen of the 932nd Artillery Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Afanasy Andreyevich Ryasny, and his deputy in the political part was Major Andrei Mikhailovich Timofeyev, opened fire on them. The army artillery supporting us also opened fire. The battle reached the highest tension at the moment when the German chains were 300-400 meters away. The continuous rumble of bursts and the roar of tanks was in our ears. From the flashes of fire, our eyes were blinded. Our artillerymen hit the enemy tanks and infantry almost at point-blank range. Machine guns and mortars were firing at the infantry. Gun Sergeant Abram Pavukin stood on the right flank. He was worried, as if even heard the pounding of his heart. And then he saw the black dots of tanks. They came out of the gully and quickly grew in size, followed by infantry. Neighboring guns began to palm. The sergeant, having chosen a target, made the first shot. The tank turned sideways and went up in smoke. Pavukin began to hit the other tanks. Abram looked to the right. Senior Lieutenant Kushnarov, the deputy commander in charge of the political part of the 1st Division, shouted to him, "The bastards want to bypass us." Sergeant Pavukin quickly turned the gun, and several shells hit an enemy tank. Another tank was hit by the calculation of Communist Sergeant Ivan Nikolaevich Podigolov. Some tanks began to hit our artillery. The field became black around the guns. The wind carried the smell of cinders and smoke from the hot enemy tanks. One after another shells fired from a fascist tank knocked out the calculation. The gun commander Sergeant Pavukin was wounded, but the communist did not leave the gun beat and beat and beat at the enemy. Deputy Commander Kushnarov came to his aid. It doubled his strength, gave him more confidence. Kushnarov, feeding shells, encouraged him. Suddenly the deputy saw how on the right the Germans broke through the defense of the 1245th Rifle Regiment, and the tanks were coming straight to the gun. Pavukin managed to make a shot almost at point-blank range and hit one tank, but did not notice the second and did not have time to bounce into the gap. The enemy tank crushed the gun and together with it, the communist Sergeant Abram Prokopievich Pavukin. This enemy tank hit the gun crew of Sergeant Yakov Ilarianovich Gorbunov machine gunners. Machine gunners hit the enemy infantry, trying to tear them away from the tanks. Armored fighters hit the tanks. Machine gunner Ivan Trofimovich Babkin shot the enemy infantry at point-blank range. In a short time he fired 3 discs at the bandits, killing many. The fascists began to approach Babkin in small groups, but he patiently waited for them. Here they are already 15-20 meters away. Raising their heads, one even shouted, "Rus, surrender." An anti-tank grenade flew in response, but the survivors crawled forward. Another grenade, the Germans were silent. Armored gunner Junior Sergeant Nikolai Prokopenko shot down 2 tanks in this battle. The gun crew of Senior Sergeant Katrich, being on direct aim, hit 2 tanks. Petty Officer Batalov, 1 tank. Private Pyotr Chupin, being on the left flank of his platoon, was shelled by the enemy. The brave warrior noticed a group of Germans approaching the platoon's fighting order. Chupin decided to outwit the enemy. He took off his helmet and put it in a prominent place and crawled around. The enemy soldiers focused their attention and opened fire on the helmet. At this time, Chupin came to their rear and opened fire from a hand machine gun. 7 Germans exterminated and 16 raised their hands and surrendered as prisoners. Pyotr Prokofievich Chupin was awarded after the battle. In the battles of February 17, the regiments of the division repulsed 5 fierce attacks of enemy tanks and infantry and, continuing to hold their positions, hit 7 tanks, 5 armoured personnel carriers and destroyed a lot of enemy manpower, however suffered heavy losses in the regiments themselves. On February 18, the enemy introduced fresh units of the Adolf Hitler Mech Division, the Deadhead Unit and infantry units. On the night of February 18, having crossed the Danube, a sudden night attack occupied Ebed and other settlements, displacing our left neighbour 93rd Guards Division, came to our rear. At dawn the enemy struck at our right neighbour, the 409th Rifle Division. A difficult situation was created on the entire section of the front of our Rifle Corps. The enemy managed to displace the 6th and 409th Infantry Divisions and bypass our regiments from the right flank. Around the 1,243rd and 1,245th Infantry Regiments and 1 battalion of the 1,241st Infantry Regiment began to tighten the ring of encirclement. The regiments of the division, fighting hard, repelled 5 powerful attacks of tanks and infantry. The enemy constantly introduced fresh forces into the battle. The situation was getting more complicated by the hour. Enemy machine gunners rushed to the attack. Tanks approached the fighting order of the 1,245th Rifle Regiment, bringing down a barrage of fire on the soldiers. Clear shots of our artillery rang out. The gun of Sergeant Ivan Podygalov also opened fire. The shells, hitting one of the tanks, sparkled on the armour. The tank froze in place. Having detected Podygalov's guns, the Hitlerites opened fire on it. By the flashes of tank guns, Staff Sergeant Mikhail Lashin saw the enemy vehicles. A few seconds passed. At the command of Mikhail Vasilievich, the calculation sent an accurate shell to the tank. Soon the second enemy tank burst into flames, but the rest of the vehicles continued to advance stubbornly. One of the tanks came out from behind the crest of the height. It was met by Ivan Nikolaevich Podygalov's calculation and almost at point-blank range sent a shell to the target. Another tank caught fire. The rest of the tanks, unable to withstand the impact of artillerymen and armoured fighters, moved back. Under the strong fire of machine guns, mortars, machine guns of our soldiers retreated and fascist machine gunners. But after a while the fascists again went on the attack. The battle was getting tenser and fiercer with every minute. However, these attacks were also repulsed. About these battles, the head of the political department of the 7th Guards Army, Major General Zykov, right in the battles of February 18 with the counter-attacking enemy personnel, where the head of the political department of the compound, Comrade Anotdinov, showed fortitude and persistence. Taking advantage of the night cover, the battalion of Senior Lieutenant Alexander Alexandrovich European, a member of the All-Union Communist Party, suddenly attacked the enemy, who had settled in a populated area, and broke through to his rear. The Germans fled, but soon, having come to their senses, began to counterattack our fighters with superior forces. During the day of fighting, the battalion repulsed 7 counterattacks. At 23 hours on February 18 from the commander of the 7th Guards, Army received an order to withdraw the division to a new line. But by this time, the enemy had already begun to close the ring around our regiments. The task was not to let them close the ring, to break through to a new line. Indescribable fierce battles unfolded. Death raged around, but the soldiers did not think about it. One thing was on everyone's mind: to break through the ring, to destroy the... And so the soldiers fought for 3 days until they reached the specified boundary. It should be noted that then, in the battles, the soldiers did not feel themselves heroes. They just did what they were supposed to do in the war, carried out the order. But there was also something that went beyond the boundary of human capabilities, beyond the boundary of the order, and became... Communists and political workers showed special heroism and skill in organizing the personnel for fortitude in repelling enemy attacks. The Partog of the 1,245th Rifle Regiment Captain Viktor Igorov went to the battle lines at the most critical moment of the battle. The party felt that the nerves of the soldiers were strained to the limit. After all, they were to throw back the Nazis and break through the ring of encirclement. "How is the mood?" asks the captain. "Are the machine guns, grenades in order? The main thing, comrades, do not linger here to skip the open space. As soon as our artillery will transfer the fire, do not hesitate to rise and hit the Nazis. They had no time to dig deep trenches overnight. It will be easier to deal with them there." Me, the parter, told them. He himself participated in many battles from Rzhev to Budapest, was wounded, in the battles learned the hard science of soldiering. He was awarded several times. The thunder of dozens of guns behind the infantry shook everything around. Over the ranks of the Nazis hovered a thick curtain of earth and smoke. Here rose a rocket. It described an arc in the direction of the enemy positions and, slowly descending, extinguished. Tira Partorg, as if by a spring, was thrown on the bumper of the trench. He straightened up, raised his automatic rifle above his head, shouted loudly, "Nafashantings me, follow me to beat the fascists." Shooting from the machine gun, rushed towards the fascist positions. The captain saw the soldiers running after him, heard a loud hurrah. Hurrah! Behind his back someone shrieked and fell down, hit by an enemy bullet. The group broke into the line of enemy trenches, and a hand-to-hand fight ensued. Captain Igorov managed to knock down one and another fascist. Suddenly Igorov felt a strong blow on his head and fell. For a moment he lost consciousness. He woke up from the touch of soldiers' hands. "But we thought, comrade party leader, that you be—" "My head? The captain said quietly. If I didn't have a helmet, I would be dead." Hitlerites, having come to their senses, intensified their fire. Especially hard hit the machine gun. He did not let them raise their heads. One by one, the soldiers left the line. To lie like this, that we thought the parter, the enemy will destroy all. It was not so far to the enemy line, from where they were firing. At that time, Ivan Rumyantsevov, a member of the party bureau, crawled up to him and addressed the parter. "Mercy, comrade captain, I'll risk cutting this bastard." "Miss, how?" asked the partridge. "I'll go around him." "Rebbe, try, but be careful." Favs, crawling on his elbows, went forward to the left of the machine gun. Soon the machine gun fell silent. Viktor Alexandrovich shouted, "Mertha, prepare to attack. Grenades in the battle." Partorg was the first to rush forward again, dragging the soldiers with him. He thought about one thing: to run to the enemy trenches as soon as possible. In Igorov's actions there was a sense of duty, responsibility for the lives of soldiers and fighting. He ran to the enemy trenches and threw a grenade. Hand-to-hand fighting started again. And from behind rumbled Russian hurrah. Hurrah! It rushed to the enemy positions of the main forces of the regiment. In this fight fell to the death of the brave parter, the soul of the soldiers, Captain Viktor Alexandrovich Igorov. Igorov's wife Nevzorova lives in Kazan on Podmiteyevskaya Street, 143 CS 1. Sincere condolences, Galina Alexeyevna. In another section of the battle to repel the attack of the fascists raised the soldiers of the 1,241st Rifle Regiment instructor of the political department, Ivan Sergeyevich Gerasimenko. In this battle he was wounded. When repulsing the enemy attack, the machine gun crew of the communist Sergeant Konyukov, a sergeant of the 1,241st Infantry Regiment, moved to the flank of the enemy, opened a devastating fire on the attacking Germans, killed many of them and forced them to withdraw. Sergeant Potikin's gun crew hit an enemy tank. Lieutenant Grigory Shukleyev, deputy battalion commander on political part of the 1,245th Rifle Regiment, by personal example raised the battalion's soldiers against the counter-attacking fascists. The battalion repulsed the counterattack. Lieutenant Grigory Shukleyev died in this deadly battle. The rifle company of the 1,245th Rifle Regiment of Communist Junior Lieutenant Koroman acted steadfastly. The Germans attacked the company 3 times. The soldiers skillfully and mercilessly beat the attackers. Koroman himself exterminated 7 Hitlerites. Encouraged by his example, the soldiers of the company began to beat the enemy even harder and forced him to withdraw. A little dawn broke over the bridgehead. The battle broke out again. Everything was blackened with mud and smoke. Everything that could burn was burning: vehicles, land, The situation was becoming threatening. The division had to retreat to a new line. It is difficult to tear a soldier away from the place, to which he is already at least a little, but accustomed. He fought and destroyed fascist scum. It didn't seem so vulnerable to him, but the law of battle, the threat of complete encirclement, dictated its own. 243rd Rifle Regiment, the commander of the regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Mikhailov, his deputy on political part, Lieutenant Colonel Mikhail Akhmetsyanov, to withdraw last and go in rearguard to cover the departure of the rest of the units. Having reached the Mujla area, the regiment commander Mikhailov decided to suspend the regiment's withdrawal and wait for the artillery to arrive. Taking advantage of the regiment's halt, Hitlerites attacked it from the north and south with tanks and self-propelled vehicles. An unequal battle ensued. The main forces of the regiment broke through the ring of encirclement and joined with other retreating units. Fighting, the regiment continued the withdrawal. The commander of the regiment, Mikhailov, with a group of soldiers, was the last. Hitlerites cut off this group from the main forces and surrounded it. A fierce battle ensued. One fascist Magyar strongly hit Lieutenant Colonel Mikhailov on the head. Alexei Pavlovich lost consciousness. He woke up already in the circle of fascists. He was taken prisoner. On April 1, taking advantage of our air raid on German positions, Lieutenant Colonel Mikhailov escaped from the fascist prisoner of war camp. On April 3, he crossed the front line in the area of Badje to his own. Scattered groups of soldiers of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment and artillerymen, who were then waiting for Regimental Commander Mikhailov to pull up, repulsing the enemy machine gunners who were attacking them, withdrew southeast of Mujla into the forest near the Danube River. Captain Leonid Gutchenko, deputy commander of the 3rd Division of the 932nd Artillery Regiment, united these disparate groups of more than 300 men, divided them into companies, appointed commanders, and took up a circular defense. With the onset of darkness, the encircled group, having repelled several enemy counterattacks, stormed the ring and, under the command of Leonid Efimovich Gutchenko, to the location of our troops. The situation in the area of the command post of the division commander was becoming threatening. The Germans, after breaking through the defense of our right neighbour, the 409th Infantry Division, began to approach the command post of the division from the rear. Major General Karpukin ordered everyone withdraw to the reserve. We did not have time to move away and 3 or 4 kilometres, as we noticed that the enemy infantry began to descend from the heights on the road to cut off our escape routes. General Karpukin was riding ahead on the villa. He turned steeply to the right and rode in the virgin soil, farther from the road, as the snow was shallow. I was driving the MK. The car would not go on the virgin land. Then I decided to drive at top speed straight down the road. There was no other way. My driver, Sergeant Baskalov, was an experienced driver. I don't know how long we drove. I see that ahead the fascists, shooting from automatic rifles, are running down from the heights approaching the road. Suddenly the slopes of my car burst, broken by an enemy machine gun burst. Baskalov sharply turned the car to the right, and on the discs the car went down to the gully and stopped. At that moment a shell, fired from the gun of the Army Anti-Tank Brigade, flew in front of us with a direct aim, almost obliquely, almost hitting our car. We abandoned the car, and shooting back with automatic rifles, ran to the artillerymen. The artillery was hitting the enemy infantry with shrapnel. The Nazis lay low and then began to crawl back. A lieutenant, the commander of the firing platoon, came up to me and said, Comrade Colonel, say thank you to the Germans for saving your life. I was surprised. Why did the Germans save our lives? First of all, answered the lieutenant, the Nazis were shooting at the slopes of your car, not at you. Obviously, they wanted to take you alive. Secondly, they, having hit the slopes of your car, stopped. If the car had gone a few more meters forward, you would have been hit by a shell of our gun, because we were shooting obliquely. Then you all would have been kaput. I thanked the lieutenant for their heroic deed to stop the Nazis and save our lives. We joined the soldiers of the retreating regiment. My horse driver, Lieutenant Mikhail Agagshitov, brought up my horse Roma. The 1245th Rifle Regiment, having repulsed several enemy attacks, by the evening of February 19 came to a new line. When I came to the command post of the division commander, Vasily Dmitrievich, I thought you fell into the clutches of the Germans. I saw your car rushing into the arms of the Nazis. After my account of what happened, the general said, "You were born with your shirt on." In this battle on this road, during the withdrawal, died the head of the political department of our right neighbour, the 409th Infantry Division. Hero of the Soviet Union, Major Peter Petrovich Spirin, and his deputy on political part, Major Peter Petrovich Gritsenko, organized the withdrawal of his regiment well and skillfully. The regiment, under cover of the 1,243rd Infantry Regiment and Artillery, repulsing enemy attacks, came to a new line, having saved personnel and batteries. The division, carrying out the order of the commander, with heavy fighting came to the eastern bank of the Grone, taking the defense, in cooperation with other army formations, stopped the enemy offensive on its own section. This time Hitlerites managed to realize their plan of liquidation of our Grone bridgehead. However, they failed to achieve their ultimate goal, to break through the ring and help the Budapest grouping to get out of the cauldron. Here we should emphasize the great role of the 7th Guards Army, hence our division, which fought as part of this army. The army units in early January, having dealt heavy blows to the enemy on the western bank of the Grone, drove him farther from Budapest, and reflecting strong tank counterattacks on themselves, pulled down large enemy forces that sought to break the ring and join the encircled grouping in Budapest. Thus, the 7th Guards Army contributed to the defeat of the Hitlerites surrounded in Budapest. So on February 13, the troops of the 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian fronts, in cooperation with the Danube military flotilla, completed the defeat of the fascist troops surrounded in Budapest. This led to the fact that its last satellite, Hungary, was withdrawn from the war on the side of Germany. Participants of the Budapest operation were awarded medals for the capture of Budapest. For reasons not clear to us, we did not receive the medal, although we were worthy, and the personnel of the 7th Guards Army received medals. Bloody battles for the complete liberation from the Nazis continued in several more areas of Hungary. Especially strong fights were in the Balaton area. Only on April 4, 1945, freedom came to the Hungarian land. It was brought by the Soviet soldiers who defeated fascism. About 200 days and nights was the battle for the liberation of Hungary. Above all the hills and roofs of Budapest, above the filigree Gothic tower of Matthias Cathedral, stands on Mount Gellert a majestic monument built by the Hungarian people in memory of the Soviet liberators.